Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We are diving into the absolutely fascinating psychology behind what actually drives an athlete to wake up at 4 a.m., totally sacrifice their social life, and push their body to the absolute brink of exhaustion, all just to get a tiny bit better at their sport. Now, you might think that throwing trophies and huge financial rewards at them is the best way to drive that success, right? Well, actually, performance psychology shows us that relying solely on those shiny external prizes can ultimately destroy an athlete's long-term passion and resilience. So today, we're going to break down the core differences between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and figure out how to build a performance mindset that literally lasts a lifetime. So, at its core, the word motivation actually comes from the Latin word movere, which simply means to move. It's that internal or external force that draws someone toward a specific goal. Simple enough, right? But if you're a coach, a parent, or even an athlete yourself, you've probably noticed a pretty frustrating trend. We consistently use the completely wrong forces to get athletes moving. We rely on methods that kind of seem logical on the surface, but actually do a lot of damage to a person's long-term drive. Which brings us to section 1, the extrinsic trap. To spark that drive, we usually dangle these highly tangible extrinsic rewards right in front of athletes. It's a super common yet deeply flawed trap, and it's incredibly easy to fall into because, honestly, it seems to work at first. We offer the massive championship trophies, the promise of a full-ride college scholarship, the media exposure, the money, the praise. And here's the thing. Initially, it absolutely works. You'll see this massive immediate spike in effort. But give it some time, and that drive, it completely fizzles out. Think of it kind of like the psychological equivalent of a lollipop. We actually call this the lollipop effect. I mean, a young kid might excitedly sprint across a soccer field just to get a piece of candy, right? But if you try applying that exact same superficial reward system to an older athlete, it eventually just stops working. We end up relying way too heavily on this extrinsic motivation, which is really nothing more than a temporary fix. And that brings up a really critical question that I want you to think about. Have you ever noticed that once an athlete finally wins that big championship, or they secure that massive multi-million-dollar contract, their performance often drops the very next season? Why does that intense hunger just suddenly disappear? It's a phenomenon we see in professional sports all the time, and it perfectly highlights the hidden long-term danger of external rewards. Let's unpack exactly why that happens in section 2, the triangle of motivation. Best-selling author and researcher Nir Eyal points out something brilliant here. He says we completely misunderstand how motivation actually works. We usually view it as this simple straight line, like, okay, here's what I want, a trophy, so here's the behavior I have to do to get it. This straight line myth assumes that if the reward is big enough, it's just going to automatically generate the right behavior. But as we all know, human psychology is rarely a straight line. Motivation isn't a line at all. It's actually a triangle, and it requires 3 very distinct pieces to function. First up, you have behavior, so the physical training, the sweat, the actual effort. Second, you have the benefit. That's the reward they're chasing. But the third, and honestly the most critical piece of the whole puzzle, is belief. An athlete has to possess the deep internal belief that they are actually capable of achieving the goal. Because if they lack that final step, that internal belief, the entire motivation triangle just collapses. You could give an athlete the perfect training behavior plan, and they might deeply, desperately want the benefit of winning. But if they secretly do not believe they're capable, they will subconsciously self-sabotage. They'll just stop putting in the effort, and it won't matter how many millions of dollars or shiny trophies you promise them. To really understand the true engine of drive, let's step away from pro sports for a second. Just picture that 80-year-old guy you see power walking through the local park every single morning at the crack of dawn. He's got a house, he's got a pension, a family. So why is he out there walking? He definitely isn't trying to win a plastic medal, and he's sure not holding out for a lucrative sneaker endorsement. He's clearly being driven by a completely different engine. And that engine is exactly what we're covering in section 3, the intrinsic engine. You see, extrinsic motivation is really just a fleeting external hunger. The danger there is that external hunger gets satisfied way too easily. Once the athlete gets the cash or the trophy, boom, the craving vanishes. But intrinsic motivation, that comes from deep within. It provides this incredibly long-lasting satisfaction and pure enjoyment that external rewards just can't even come close to matching. So according to sports performance psychology, you can actually trigger this powerful internal engine in 3 main ways. First, focus on accomplishment. That means motivating by focusing purely on mastering a highly specific, very difficult skill rather than just staring at the final score. Second, Seek stimulation. Tap into that raw adrenaline rush and the sheer physical joy of pushing your limits. And third, cultivate curiosity. Encourage athletes to become absolute students of the game, completely obsessed with gaining knowledge and testing out new techniques. Now, let's look at how elite athletes protect this engine when things get, frankly, incredibly painful. What if I told you that one of the greatest ultramarathoners in the entire world intentionally builds layers of motivation, fully expecting her primary willpower to completely fail her during a race? Let's explore how she does this in Section 4, Layering Your Motivation. You can actually see this exact strategy in action across the career of legendary ultramarathon champion Gerda Steen. It's brilliant, and it shows exactly why you can't rely on just one single type of motivation, especially when you're in the middle of a grueling 90-kilometer race. In her early career, her motivation was mostly extrinsic. She just wanted to prove herself as a successful pro. Then, in her mid-career, it evolved into wanting to represent her country at the Olympics. But today, her deepest layer is entirely intrinsic and purpose-driven. She runs to inspire the next generation, showing everyday people that they can overcome their own life struggles. That is her ultimate backup plan. She completely understands that willpower alone is never going to be enough. By intentionally layering her motivation over time, she guarantees that when one source inevitably dries up in the middle of a brutal race, or when the physical pain just gets way too high, a deeper layer automatically takes over. She always has another powerful reason to keep putting one foot in front of the other. So, here is your action plan to take away from this explainer. First, stop relying on superficial bribes, the lollipops and the external praise. Instead, focus on building an unbreakable motivation triangle. Make sure you have the behavior, the benefit, and most importantly, the belief. Cultivate a true desire to master difficult skills just for the sake of it, and build deep layers of intrinsic purpose. That way, when one layer fails, you've got another one right there to catch you. I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on for your own journey. What is the absolute deepest layer of motivation that keeps you going when things get incredibly tough? Take a little time today to identify your own layers. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really look forward to exploring more fascinating topics with you next time. Until then, keep pushing and keep finding your drive.